The jukebox hummed low in the corner, neon lights flickered, and the smell of spilled beer lingered heavy in the air. A U.S. tomb guard, still in his crisp ceremonial uniform, pushed open the door and stepped inside. He wasn't here for attention. He wasn't here to start trouble. All he wanted was a quiet drink in a bar his father once loved. But the moment he entered, the room shifted. Conversations paused. Eyes darted toward his polished shoes, the gleam of his buttons, the way he carried himself with absolute discipline. And then, from behind the counter, the bar owner's voice sliced through the silence. "You out." The guard froze. Not out of fear, but because those words carried a venom he knew all too well. The owner leaned forward, glaring. "We don't serve men like you. Not in that uniform." The crowd stirred, whispers rippling like an unseen wave. A few patrons smirked, curious to see what would happen. Others stiffened in their chairs, veterans among them, their jaws tightening with unspoken anger. But the guard, he didn't flinch, didn't shout, didn't explain who he was or why he had chosen this place. He simply stood there, posture straight, silence his only shield. The bar owner's face grew redder. He slammed his towel onto the counter. "What? You think you're better than the rest of us? You think standing still makes you some kind of hero?" A nervous laugh bubbled from the corner, then died quickly when a veteran in a leather jacket turned and glared. Even the children sitting with their parents seemed to sense the weight of the moment. One little boy tugged at his father's sleeve and whispered, "Why won't he say anything?" The guard's eyes flicked toward the child for the briefest moment, but he remained silent. His stillness louder than any argument could be. The bar owner stepped around the counter now, close enough to shove him if he wanted. The tension was a storm about to break, and then just as the crowd thought the guard would finally speak, he simply raised his chin, nodded once in quiet dignity, and turned toward the door. The room watched him leave in stunned silence, but what no one in that bar knew was that by tomorrow evening 30 guards would walk through that very same door, and when they did, the world would never forget it. The tomb guard who walked out of that bar carried silence with him like a shield, but his silence had roots. His name was Michael Carter, 30 years old, and every thread of that uniform told a story most people would never see. Michael hadn't always been a guard. Years before, he was a soldier in Afghanistan, where war had carved lines into his face far earlier than age ever could. He had seen dust storms that blinded entire battalions, heard the thunder of artillery that shook the ground like an angry god, and watched friends bleed out in the dust while medics fought for seconds. But one moment haunted him above all. His best friend, Private Danny Reeves, was more like a brother than a fellow soldier. They'd grown up in the same small town, signed up together, and swore they'd look out for each other. One night, under the orange glow of tracer rounds, Danny took a bullet meant for him. Michael held him as he slipped away, and the last words he heard were, "Don't let them forget me." When Michael returned home, he was no longer the same man. Some soldiers ran from memory by burying themselves in noise. Michael ran the opposite way toward silence. That silence eventually led him to Arlington National Cemetery, where discipline was sharper than steel and stillness was more powerful than any shout. Becoming a sentinel of the tomb of the unknown soldier wasn't just duty for him, it was Danny's legacy. Every measured step, every unbroken stare, was his way of keeping his friend's memory alive. That was the man who stepped into the bar that night, disciplined, carrying invisible scars beneath a uniform polished to perfection. The bar owner, on the other hand, had a story of his own. Raymond Doyle had been running Doyle's Tavern for 20 years. It wasn't fancy cheap neon lights, dartboards on the wall, pool tables with cracked felt, but it was his pride, and locals knew it as a place where regulars swapped stories over cheap beer. What most didn't know, however, was Raymond's bitterness toward the military ran deep. His younger brother, Patrick, had enlisted during the Iraq War and never made it back. Raymond blamed the system, the officers, the government, everyone except his brother's own decision to serve. Over the years, that grief twisted into resentment. Whenever he saw uniforms, all he could see was a coffin draped in a flag. So when Michael Carter walked in wearing his tomb guard uniform, Raymond didn't see honor. He didn't see discipline. He saw another reminder of what he had lost, another wound ripped open. His grief lashed out as anger, and Michael became the target. The location itself made the confrontation even more symbolic. Doyle's Tavern wasn't just any bar. It sat in a neighborhood where military families had lived for decades. Photos of old veterans lined some of the walls, grainy black and white snapshots of men in World War II helmets, faded Polaroids of Vietnam squads standing beside helicopters. Ironically, Michael's own father had been one of those veterans. Before his death, he had brought Michael here once as a teenager, saying, "This place is where stories live." That memory was one reason Michael had chosen to step through its doors again, hoping to feel a connection to his father. He never expected to be told he wasn't welcome. The night of the incident, the crowd inside the bar reflected America itself. A group of young college kids sat in the corner, laughing too loudly, not understanding the weight of history carried by the man in uniform. A couple of veterans hunched at the bar nursing drinks, their faces hardening when the owner spoke against the guard. And at one table, a family with 2 children ate burgers and fries, the father quietly explaining what Arlington meant to his wide-eyed son. That mix of people was crucial. Some were indifferent, some were defensive, and some were quietly reverent. It turned the bar into a stage where the clash between resentment and respect would play out, and yet, Michael never lashed back. He had faced insurgents in the desert, men who wanted him dead. He had survived firefights that tore through walls like paper. Compared to that, the anger of one grieving bar owner felt like a different kind of battle, one he would not fight with fists or words. For Michael, dignity was his defense. He believed that silence had more weight than shouting, and that respect once broken could only be restored through action, not arguments. That's why he turned and left quietly, even as the eyes of the bar followed him out into the night. That what no one inside that bar knew was how far the ripple of that decision would spread. Veterans who had been there whispered about it on the way home. A college kid recorded part of the encounter on his phone, posting it online with the caption, "Man kicked out just for wearing a uniform, unreal." By morning, the clip would circulate, and by evening Michael's brothers in arms, the other tomb guards, would show the world exactly what honor looked like when multiplied 30 times over. The video clip that captured Michael being ordered out of Doyle's Tavern spread faster than gossip in a small town. By the next day, it had already been shared thousands of times. Words like disrespect, disgrace, and unbelievable followed every repost. Some defended the owner, saying a business had the right to refuse service, but many more demanded answers. That night, when Michael returned, not inside the bar this time, but walking past it on his way home, the whispers inside were already louder than the jukebox. Doyle's Tavern was buzzing with arguments. Some patrons thought Raymond, the owner, had gone too far. Others said Michael had been arrogant to walk in wearing a uniform like that, like a flag thrown in their faces. Raymond, himself, doubled down. "I don't care who he is," he spat, slamming glasses onto the counter. "This place isn't for costumes and parades. He wants respect. He can go stand at his cemetery and play statue." A couple of veterans sitting at the bar shifted uneasily. One of them, a gray-haired Marine with a faded tattoo on his forearm, muttered, "That man's no statue. You think you can stand in the rain, the snow, the heat, guarding silence day and night, and call it nothing? You've got no idea." But Raymond ignored him. His bitterness had calcified into pride, and pride doesn't bend easily. The following evening, Michael did not return, but the bar couldn't escape the shadow of what had happened. Veterans began showing up, not to start fights, but to sit quietly at tables, ordering coffee or soda instead of beer. They didn't need to say why they were there. Their presence was a silent rebuke. Raymond's irritation grew. He started muttering loud enough for everyone to hear, "You people worship uniforms like they're saints, but they're not. They're just men hiding behind medals." A college kid nearby filmed him again. "Dude," the owner's still going off about the guard. The video caption read, "That clip made its way online." Now the story wasn't just about a guard being kicked out, it was about the tavern owner himself, digging his own grave with words. By the third night, Doyle's Tavern was a pressure cooker. Michael still hadn't returned, but his absence loomed larger than his presence had. Every conversation seemed to circle back to him. A group of young patrons tried to mock him, imitating the stiff walk of a guard between the They laughed too loudly, but their laughter died when one of the veterans at the bar barked, "Enough." The room froze. The veteran's voice carried the weight of battlefields no one else in that room had seen. He didn't need to explain further. Silence fell, and the young patrons quietly returned to their drinks. Raymond, however, was unmoved. He sneered, poured himself a whiskey, and raised it like a toast. "Let them all talk online," he said. "He's just a man who thinks silence makes him better. Me, I speak my mind. If they don't like it, they can find another bar." That was the night Michael returned on alone, but with quiet steps as if testing the ground. He didn't come in uniform this time. He wore a plain shirt and jeans, his posture still as disciplined as ever, but his intent wasn't to cause a scene. He simply walked to a corner table and sat. The air thickened instantly. Conversations dipped to whispers. Raymond saw him, and his jaw tightened. "You again," he said, voice sharp. "Thought I told you this place wasn't for your kind." Michael said nothing. He didn't even look at Raymond. He just sat, eyes fixed forward, hands folded on the table. That silence infuriated Raymond more than words ever could. He marched from behind the counter, pointing a finger at Michael. What, too proud to answer me? Too good to speak to the rest of us? Still no reply. The crowd's tension mounted. One of the college kids smirked, whispering, "Guess he's just gonna sit there." But beside him, the Marine veteran leaned forward, his voice low but dangerous. "That man has stood at attention through blizzards, through heat waves, guarding men who never came home. Don't you dare laugh at him." The room shifted. Lines were being drawn. Some patrons glanced nervously at Michael, wondering if he would finally respond. Others stared at Raymond, realizing his anger was unraveling him in front of everyone. Raymond wasn't done. He stepped closer, almost nose-tuners with Michael. "Say something," he demanded. "If you've got so much honor, let's hear it." Michael turned his head slowly, eyes calm, unblinking. For the first time, his voice came measured, deep, steady. "I don't need to shout for honor. Honor is proven in silence." The bar went still. The words weren't loud, but they cut through the room sharper than any yell. Raymond's face flushed red. He shoved Michael's shoulder harder than necessary. Gasps echoed around the room. A child at the family table clutched his father's arm, but Michael didn't rise, didn't retaliate. He simply stood, straightened his posture, and walked toward the door. At the threshold, he paused, glanced back once, and offered a small nod to the veterans watching. Then he stepped into the night, leaving the tavern heavier than when he'd entered. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the Marine veteran broke the silence. "Tomorrow," he said softly, but with certainty, "he won't be alone." The words hung in the air like a prophecy, and by the next evening, the prophecy would come true in a way no one in Doyle's tavern could have imagined. The night after Michael's quiet defiance, Doyle's tavern was packed. Word had spread. Some came for drinks, some for answers, and some just to witness what might happen next. The air was thick with expectation, as though the walls themselves were bracing for something inevitable. Raymond Doyle stood behind the counter, pouring drinks with short, jerky movements, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting toward the door every few minutes. He told himself he didn't care if the guard returned, but the truth was, the thought gnawed at him. Part of him wanted Michael to walk in again, just so he could finish what he started. And then, just after 9, the door opened. Michael Carter stepped inside, not in jeans this time, not in plain clothes. Tonight, he wore his Tomb Guard uniform, the very same one that had sparked the confrontation days earlier. It was pressed to perfection, shoes polished to a mirror shine. Every line of his posture screamed discipline, every detail radiated respect. The bar fell silent, even the jukebox seemed to hush itself. Michael didn't speak. He didn't scan the crowd. He simply walked, measured step after measured step, to the same table in the corner and sat down. Raymond's face burned red. His hand tightened around the glass he was holding until it nearly cracked. Finally, he slammed it down and stormed from behind the counter. "You think you can just walk in here again?" His voice rang louder than usual, fueled by anger and the expectant eyes of the crowd. "You think that uniform makes you untouchable?" Michael didn't answer. His gaze stayed forward, steady. Raymond jabbed a finger at him. "You hear me? You're not welcome here. Take your little act somewhere else. This is my place. You don't get to waltz in dressed like some toy soldier and expect respect." The veterans at the bar stiffened. One of them, the gray-haired Marine, stood as if ready to step in. But Michael raised one hand slightly, a small gesture. "Don't." The Marine sank back down reluctantly. Though his eyes never left Raymond. The silence stretched, unbearable. Finally, Raymond's anger spilled over. He grabbed Michael's shoulder and shoved harder this time, nearly knocking him against the table. Gasps erupted around the room. A child whimpered. Glasses rattled as a few patrons jumped to their feet. Michael rose slowly, deliberately. His face betrayed nothing, no rage, no fear, no pride, just calm. He turned, squared his shoulders, and faced Raymond directly. For a heartbeat, it looked as though a fight would break out. The crowd held its breath, and then, Michael did something no one expected. He raised his right hand, palm flat against his chest, and delivered a perfect, ceremonial salute nod to Raymond, but to the veteran sitting quietly at the bar. His eyes locked with theirs, steady and unyielding. The room froze. Raymond's mouth fell open, his anger deflated by the sheer gravity of the gesture. Michael lowered his hand, turned back toward the door, and began to walk out. Every step was deliberate, echoing like a drumbeat of restraint and dignity. The silence was so profound that even the hum of the neon lights seemed deafening. At the doorway, Michael paused. He looked back once, not at Raymond, not at the jeering patrons, but at the children who had watched everything unfold. His gaze softened for a brief moment, as though reminding them that strength didn't need fists to prove itself. Then he left, the door clicked shut, and the tavern remained suspended in stunned quiet. For nearly a full minute, no one spoke. And then the Marine veteran broke the silence. His voice was low, gravelly, but every word carried like thunder. "You just put your hands on a man who guards the dead you'll never understand. And tomorrow, he won't come back alone." The words rippled through the room like a prophecy. Phones were pulled out, whispers spread, and already some were dialing friends, telling them to be there the next night. Something bigger than a bar fight was coming. Something that would turn a tavern into a stage for the world. Raymond tried to laugh it off, but his laugh was hollow. He poured himself another drink with shaking hands. Inside, unease gnawed at him, though he'd never admit it, because deep down, he knew he hadn't just shoved a man. He had shelved an institution, a tradition, a brotherhood bound tighter than blood. And they would answer, not with fists, not with shouts, but with something far more terrifying, unshakable, disciplined unity. By the time the night ended, Doyle's Tavern wasn't just a neighborhood bar anymore. It had become the eye of a storm the whole country was about to see. The next evening, Doyle's Tavern was buzzing with the same nervous energy, but this time, the air carried anticipation rather than just tension. Rumors had spread, phones had recorded the previous night's confrontation. Everyone, from veterans to casual bar-goers, had a sense that something extraordinary was about to happen. At exactly 8:45 p.m., a low hum of footsteps approached the tavern from the street outside. Patrons turned toward the windows, squinting through the dim neon glow, and then they saw them. 30 men, all dressed in pristine Tomb Guard uniforms, marched in perfect formation down the sidewalk. Their boots clicked against the pavement with mechanical precision, echoing like a heartbeat that resonated through the neighborhood. Every guard's posture was immaculate, every rifle carried with ceremonial dignity. Inside, the chatter fell to a tense hush. Raymond Doyle's jaw went slack. He fumbled with a glass, spilling whiskey onto the counter, his hands shaking. Michael Carter stepped forward from the doorway, leading them. His face was calm, his posture unwavering, but the authority radiating from him was palpable. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to threaten. The room understood instantly. Discipline had arrived. The guards filed into the bar silently, each one taking their place with military precision. Their presence filled the space like a living wall of honor. Patrons watched in AW, phones raised, recording every moment. The younger kids clutched their parents' hands wide-eyed, as if witnessing history in motion. Raymond tried to speak, to assert himself, but his words caught in his throat. I don't understand. What is this?" he stammered, eyes darting from Michael to the line of guards. Michael finally spoke, his voice steady and commanding, yet calm enough to contrast sharply with the chaos in the owner's mind. "This is what respect looks like. Not demanded, not bought, earned." A collective silence followed. The patrons felt the weight of those words. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't revenge. It was truth. And truth, standing shoulder to shoulder, 30 strong, carried more force than any fist. Some of the veterans at the bar stood, nodding in quiet approval. Others simply watched, moved by the sheer gravity of the scene. Cameras clicked, phones recorded, and within minutes, clips of the bar filled social media feeds. Headlines would soon read, 30 Tomb Guards march into bar to defend honor of a comrade. Raymond's anger finally broke, replaced by shame. He realized that the man he had shoved and mocked was not just one individual. He represented an entire legacy of service, of discipline, of honor. His hands trembled, his voice weak. "I didn't know." Michael didn't need to respond. The guards, still silent, positioned themselves strategically, a subtle reminder of order and unwavering dedication. Their stillness, mirrored from Michael himself, communicated that justice didn't need to be loud. It simply needed presence. Then, as if the moment demanded symbolism, Michael turned back toward the veterans sitting quietly at the bar. A slow, deliberate salute met their ears, a gesture so composed it drew tears from some who had served decades earlier. The children watching whispered to each other, trying to mimic the salute, wide-eyed and inspired. The effect was immediate. The crowd in the bar, who had earlier laughed, mocked, or stayed indifferent, now understood. This wasn't a spectacle. It was a lesson in dignity, honor, and silent strength. The story wasn't about confrontation, it was about discipline prevailing over chaos. Within moments, news crews, alerted by social media, began arriving outside. People on the street recorded live videos. By midnight, the phrase "honor arrived at Doyle's Tavern" was trending nationwide. Raymond Doyle, finally realizing the magnitude of what had occurred, slumped behind the counter. The man who had mocked and shoved Michael Carter now faced the undeniable truth. He had been humbled, not through violence, but through unwavering, disciplined principle. Michael stepped out into the street once more, followed by his 30 comrades. Not a word was spoken, not a gesture made beyond the precise cadence of their steps. The world outside the tavern could see it all. 30 men standing as one, silent yet commanding, proving that sometimes the loudest statement doesn't need a single shout. And as the camera panned back into the bar, capturing the mix of awe, shame, and reverence, one thing was clear: the moment would not fade. The story of honor, discipline, and silent strength had been etched into every eye in that room, and it would echo far beyond Doyle's Tavern. The morning after the event at Doyle's Tavern, the neighborhood was quiet, but the echoes of what had happened lingered in every street, every corner. News clips of the 30 tomb guards walking into the bar had gone viral. Social media feeds were filled with hashtags praising discipline, honor, and the courage of one man who stood silently, yet commanded the respect of many. Michael Carter walked slowly through the streets, uniform once again immaculate, shoes polished, rifle slung over his shoulder. He didn't smile, he didn't wave, but with every step, the weight of the previous night's victory settled into his chest. Not pride, but quiet satisfaction. A few blocks away, a small group of veterans watched him pass. One of them, the gray-haired Marine who had first whispered about the guard not being alone, tipped his hat. Another veteran muttered, "He didn't fight with anger, he fought with honor. That's what makes a man untouchable." Michael paused near a bench, reaching into his pocket for something small, a dog tag, worn smooth by years of service. He held it lightly between his fingers, remembering his friend Danny, the one he had lost in Afghanistan. A quiet whisper escaped his lips, barely audible. "I kept my promise, brother. You're not forgotten." In the distance, a small child who had watched the scene from the bar the night before waved from the sidewalk, eyes wide with admiration. Michael offered a subtle nod. No words were exchanged, but the boy's mother whispered, "That's a hero, son." Later that afternoon, at Arlington National Cemetery, Colonel Stevens waited near the tomb of the unknown soldier. His eyes followed Michael as he approached. The colonel, a man known for strict discipline and measured words, stopped in front of him. Without a word, he lifted his hand and delivered a perfect salute. Michael returned it, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. Soldiers, veterans, even civilians who had come to witness the daily ceremonies felt the weight of the gesture. The salute was more than respect. It was recognition that honor, when upheld steadfastly, could inspire generations. Michael stepped back and looked out across the rows of white headstones. The wind carried a solemn whisper through the trees. Each stone told a story of sacrifice, discipline, and courage. And he knew, in his heart, that the events at Doyle's Tavern were now part of that story, a modern testament to the enduring strength of silent commitment. Back in the neighborhood, Doyle's Tavern had changed too. Raymond Doyle, humbled and ashamed, had posted an apology online and quietly transformed the way he interacted with the community. The bar remained, but the memory of what happened would linger longer than any neon light or jukebox. Patrons shared stories of the night, recounting the awe of watching 30 guards stand as one, and Michael Carter's calm, unwavering leadership. That evening, Michael returned to his quarters, the dog tag in his hand, a photograph of Danny tucked safely in his uniform pocket, and the memory of silent salutes replaying in his mind. He allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. Discipline had won over anger, honor had prevailed over chaos, and one man's quiet resolve had reminded the world of what it truly means to serve. He placed the dog tag back around his neck, adjusted his uniform, and sat in quiet contemplation. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across Arlington. The world would continue its chaos, its noise, its endless demand for recognition. But somewhere in that silence, Michael Carter had made a statement that would echo far longer than any shouting ever could. And for the first time that day, a small, satisfied smile curved on his lips, not for himself, not for the applause, but for the legacy of honor that had been defended silently, steadfastly, and forever remembered. The story of Doyle's Tavern became more than just a local legend. It became a reminder that honor is not loud. It doesn't demand attention. It waits, it endures, and when tested, it responds with calm, measured strength. Michael Carter didn't shout. He didn't fight. He didn't need to. 30 guards standing silently behind him spoke louder than words ever could. The bar owner, once full of anger and resentment, learned a lesson that could not be taught with force. Respect, dignity, and discipline were not privileges to be earned through arrogance, they were principles to be lived. Across the country, people watched the videos, read the headlines, and shared the story. Veterans nodded knowingly, parents pointed to their children and whispered, "This is what a hero looks like." Ordinary citizens were reminded that courage isn't always explosive, it can be quiet, steadfast, and unyielding. For Michael, it was never about recognition. It was about legacy, about honoring the fallen, preserving the discipline of those who serve, and showing the world that one man, standing firm in his principles, can inspire countless others. That is the sun set over Arlington. Michael adjusted his uniform one last time. The dog tag around his neck caught the golden light, a small symbol of remembrance, promise, and resilience. The silence he carried was heavy with meaning, and yet it spoke louder than any argument or confrontation ever could. Tradition is not weakness. Stillness is strength. And honor is timeless. If this story moved you, share it to remind others of the power of discipline, courage, and respect. Subscribe to follow more stories of heroes who stand quietly, yet leave a mark the world will never forget.